Hello everyone, and welcome to the Speed Up Your Joomla Site webinar. Today is a webinar that's going to offer you a step-by-step approach to speeding up your Joomla site. And speed is very important. Having a fast site can increase paid load times, which has a direct correlation to increased traffic, revenues, and overall sales. What you're going to learn during this 1-hour webinar, again, is a step-by-step guide for increasing your Joomla site speed, an overall overview of compression in Joomla, and an overview of core Joomla caching options. And stick around because there is a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to our site. We are CloudAccess.net, and we're hosting this webinar. My name is Ryan Bernstein, and my friends call me Bernie. I'm going to be your moderator. CloudAccess.net is an internet hosting company, and we host Joomla sites exclusively. We're the host of the demo trial of Joomla at demo.joomla.org, and you can try free 30-day trials of Joomla through our platform, as many as you'd like, and each of those demo trials is active for 30 days, and at any point you can upgrade to a paid hosting package. Now, about your presenter today, Steve Burge. Steve is the founder of OS Training, and you can reach Steve at steve@ostraining.com, and he's got quite an interesting professional history. He grew up in England, and he comes from a long line of teachers. And he was a teacher all over the world, in fact, and he was also building websites. And he's kind of moonlighting. He had an evening job as a web designer while he was teaching during the day, and he decided eventually, after teaching Joomla to a friend, to combine his two passions. And he started OS Training, and they are helping thousands of people learn Joomla every year now. Now, OStraining.com is a successful online and on-site training company for Joomla and other content management systems. They've had over 10,000 students attend their online training seminars, and they've provided on-site training for some of the largest organizations in the world. They've also written Joomla Explained, the best-selling Joomla book on the market, and simply put, they provide practical, personal, and precise instruction in plain English. Now, if you are attending today's webinar and you're following along, just want to let you know that we are recording, and a copy of this webinar will be available later today at youtube.com/cloudaccess. You can see my contact information at the bottom of this screen if you'd like to get back with us, but I want you to know too that Steve is going to follow up with each of our attendees today via a newsletter with more information about the content that he's going to present. So Steve, it's really a pleasure to have you in our webinars. Thanks for doing this with us.
Oh, you're welcome, buddy.
And Steve is attending from Atlanta, Georgia, and we have attendees from all over the world. Folks, if you want to find that GoToMeeting slide out question area in your dashboard, you can post us a question. Several people already have done that. Steve probably has a lot of content. I'm really excited for his presentation, but post those questions to us, and I'll help feed those to Steve at the end or during the webinar perhaps. Or if you just want to say hi and let us know which part of the world you're attending from, we'd appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation to you now, Steve.
Cool. Welcome. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Well, thanks for being here. We're definitely excited to see this content for sure. Been looking forward to it.
Great. Welcome, guys. For those of you in the US, thanks for getting out of bed in time for a presentation early on Monday morning. For those of you in Europe, thanks for taking a break around your lunch hour to tune in. We'll try and move fairly quickly and get you some useful information about how to speed up your Joomla site. I'm going to start with an obvious question at the beginning, which is, why on earth should you care? Does it really matter if you have a fast site? People have pretty fast internet connections now, and people are used to spending all day online. Isn't it safe to assume that even if your site loads in 4 or 5 seconds, people are still going to be happy? Well, for companies that track it, they've found all sorts of benefits from speeding up their sites. Even sites as big as Amazon, Yahoo, Google, down to sites as small as mine and yours, find that they get a lot of benefits from speeding up their sites. The first one is directly as a result of Google and their rankings. The faster you rank, the faster your site is, the higher you rank. And Google is pretty explicit about this, that they will give you a bonus for every speed increase in your site. And if you pay for advertising through Google, they'll actually give you cheaper ads as well, given that you're going to be providing a better user experience and their customers are going to be happy. Basically, Google's thinking is, if they send Google users to fast sites, those customers are going to be happy. They're going to keep on coming back to Google. And so the speed of your site has a direct ability to attract more visitors to your site. And once they get there, the visitors will stay longer. The length of visitor stays on your site is directly related to the speed of each page load. You can see that if your site loads in 1 second, you're going to get maybe 5% of visitors leaving. If your page loads in about 4 seconds, that's going to jump 5-fold. And so by the time your site loads in 4 seconds, you're going to be getting about 25% of your visitors leaving. And then it gets worse from there. If your page loads in about 10 seconds, then you're going to be getting 1/3 of your visitors leaving before they actually interact with your site. And so a fast site is going to get you more traffic, and it's going to keep those visitors on your site longer. And as a direct result, you're going to be able to sell more as well. Amazon found that for every 100 milliseconds that their siting increased in speed, they were getting an extra 1% in sales. And so even small fractions were producing big results for them. So visitors will find your site more easily, they'll stay on your site longer, and they'll buy more. Those are the reasons that we care about having a fast site. And in order to establish what we're talking about, we'll be pretty clear about how we're going to measure the speed of our site. And to be honest, there's really only one metric that most people care about when it comes to speed, and that's seconds. How long your site takes to load. Everything else is really building up to that. So how fast is your site? The answer is going to be given in seconds, and that's what we're going to be dealing with in this presentation. We're dealing with Joomla in particular, and in order to see what we're dealing with and how we can speed up our site, I think it's worth asking how fast Joomla is out of the box. If you guys install a brand new Joomla site, then, and this is often using gtmetrics.com, that's what we're going to be using for quite a lot of the speed results today. How fast is Joomla by default? You're looking at about 0.5 to 1 seconds. So if you remember back to the graph we looked at a few moments ago, that's a really good speed time. So out of the box, with a brand new installation of Joomla, you're going to have no problems at all. It's going to be running more than fast enough for more than 95% of your visitors. The problems come when you involve us, when you involve me and you, that's when problems start to emerge. And so we've seen how fast Joomla is by default. Well, using the same gtmetrics.com website, we did some testing of some real live Joomla sites to see how fast Joomla is in practice. Joomla.org was loading in about 3.5 seconds. And that was actually fairly common as well. We tested JoomlaWorks.net, who produce a lot of Joomla extensions. Their site loaded in about 3.5 seconds, about the same as Joomla.org. We tested JoomlaShack.com, who provide a lot of Joomla templates and extensions, about the same time, 3.5 seconds. We tested CloudAccess.net, and they were loading in about 2.5 seconds. We tested another Joomla extension provider, anythingdigital.com. They were the first site we tested to get under 2 seconds. We tested rockettheme.com. They were slightly faster again. And our own site was running in about 1 second. But to be honest, we cheated. Before these tests were run, we spent a lot of time making sure we had all the best practices that we're going to recommend in this presentation. And I suspect quite a few of the other people mentioned here haven't gone ahead and done that. But the key point is that Joomla by default will load in less than a second, and in real life, when you deal with an active Joomla site, you're dealing in much slower speeds, sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 times slower. And so the question becomes, what's the difference between a default Joomla site and a real-life Joomla site? Why is your site running more slowly than it could? Well, to be honest, there's only a couple of people to blame for that. It's either me or my hosting company. You take a standard installation of Joomla, and there's only 2 people getting their hands on it that are going to make it slower. The first is the hosting company, and they are responsible for a large amount of the slow sites that we see. I'm going to try and avoid picking on any particular hosting company, but there are 2 or 3 which are famously bad. One way to see if your hosting company is a big problem for your site is to see how many other sites are running on your same server. There's a few of these websites out there, but myip-neighbors.com allows you to take your domain name or take your IP address and find how many other websites are on the same server and running alongside yours. If I can bring up that site in my browser and test it. We come back with 505 sites on this one IP address. We have sites after sites after sites after sites. Some of the better hosting companies may have between 50 and 100 sites on a standard server. Some of the cheaper and less reputable hosting companies will have hundreds and hundreds. This one is, well, this one is a GoDaddy example. Those 500 sites were from a GoDaddy IP, and they charge $3 a month for hosting. And literally the only way they can make that work, the only way they can make the finances work for charging $3 a month is to put 500 or more sites on one server. And so one of the quickest and easiest ways to check whether your hosting is going to be a problem is to see how much you're paying. If you go and buy dinner and you pay $3, you're not going to expect a particularly healthy dinner. If you go and buy hosting and you pay $3 a month, equally, you shouldn't expect particularly good hosting. And one of the ways that I normally ask people to check to see whether their hosting is a problem is to actually test it on their local computer. Now, we mentioned gtmetrics.com as a good way to test your sites. Unfortunately, that doesn't quite extend to sites on your local computer, so I'm going to recommend another way which we can test. And that is going to be by using the Chrome browser. I have a variety of different Joomla sites here. I have one on rochen.com. I have the CloudAccess demo site, and I also have a copy of Joomla on my desktop here. And the sites are just basic standard Joomla installs. And so I'm going to test the version of my Joomla install on my local host here. And in Chrome, I'm going to click on Inspect Element, and then the Network tab. And that's going to give me a breakdown of all the different items that are loading up on the page. I can see there are some CSS files and some JavaScript files and some image files there. And my local host initially says it loaded in about 2 seconds. It's a little hard to see perhaps, but down there at the bottom, it's going to give me a load time. One of the things to remember is that every time you test for a site's speed, you're probably going to get a slightly different result. So I'm going to refresh that a couple of times. Okay, 1.8 seconds, 1.2 seconds, 1 second, 901 seconds, 1 second. So for my local machine, with a brand new installation of Joomla, we're looking at somewhere around 1 second for loading. If I go ahead and repeat the same process with a couple of the hosted sites that I have, we're looking at under 2 seconds. We're looking at 900 milliseconds. We're looking at 1 second. We're looking at 1 second. And so what we can tell with this CloudAccess example is that the hosting is not really a problem. That the site on my computer is loading at a very similar speed to the site on CloudAccess. And I have one more example to try here with a different hosting company. And down there at the bottom of the page, we're looking at 1.3 seconds. We're looking at 1 second, 1.5 seconds, 2.5 seconds, 800 milliseconds. And so you can see that the average load times will vary, that there may be quite a lot of variation, but after testing several times, you should be able to get a feel for how fast each server location is. And so in this case, both of the hosting companies turned out fairly well. They turned out to be loading at about the same speed as my computer. But that's probably the most reliable way to see if your hosting is a problem, is to test it on your local computer and see if it loads any more quickly than it does with the hosting company. So the hosting company might be the problem, and the other limitation to making your site run quickly is probably going to be you, to be honest. It's going to be me and you. And I was going to say that there aren't any instant tricks to make your site load quicker, but there is one that we recommend, and that's basically a 5-step process that we call trick. In order to make your site run quicker, we have 5 recommendations. The first one is that you need to find a way to test and to track the speed of your site over time. The second trick is that you need to remove things, that the way to make your site faster is to simply ask it to do less. The more you ask your site to do, the slower it's going to do it all. The third step is images. Images are probably the biggest culprit of slow sites. Step 4, you can cache and compress all of the files, and that's a little bit of a solution to a problem that you've caused. If you have a lot of extensions, if you have a lot of images, then caching and compressing can really help. And then finally, keeping at it, because making a fast site is an ongoing process. So, recommendations for testing and tracking your speed. The first one, and I suspect the vast majority of you probably have Google Analytics running on your site, is to actually use Google Analytics to check your site speed. If you log into your Google Analytics account, they have a sidebar on the left-hand side, and under the Content tab, they have a Site Speed tab. And if you haven't been in there, it's well worth going in there. They're basically going to track the speed of your site over the last couple of years or longer, if you've had analytics running on your site for longer. And one of the good things about this is they don't just test your homepage. One of the problems we sometimes see with people testing their site speed is that they only test their homepage. And it turns out that they may optimize their homepage, but the inside of the site is still running slowly. Maybe their checkout is running slowly. Maybe their blog posts are running slowly. And so you can see on the PowerPoint here that Google Analytics will give you an overview of your whole site, and it's also going to drill down to specific pages as well. I'm not sure how this happened, but a blog post we have about running Joomla on a Mac is loading in 300 seconds. I suspect there's something a little fishy in those statistics, but this will allow us to drill down and find some really problem pages. It's also going to tell us how many times these pages have been loaded. So perhaps the most problematic page we have here is a blog post about updating VirtueMart 1 to VirtueMart 2. That's had over 1,000 visitors, and all of them have found that page to be really slow. And so testing and tracking your site, I suspect Google Analytics for most of you will be the quickest and easiest way to start diving in and getting some tracking data. And it gives you data for pages, and it gives you data for different types of visitors on mobile devices, it gives you information about people in different parts of the world as well. I suspect these results might not come as a big surprise. The countries like Japan, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands come back with really fast page load times, whereas the top 4 results for slow destinations are Africa, and there's a couple of Asian countries in there as well. Gives you a pretty clear indication that your site is your site speed is about averages. On some days it's going to be slower than others. Some days it's going to be faster. Some pages are going to be faster than others. Some countries are going to be faster than others. There's no one single answer to how fast your site is. Your goal is going to be to increase the average speed of your site. And the other solution that we use, in addition to Google Analytics, is pingdom.com. That's a little different to Google Analytics. One of the big advantages that Pingdom gives us is an emergency notification that our site is down, but it also pings our website every 5 minutes and tracks how fast it's loading. And so Pingdom gives us a really good historical pattern of how fast our site is loading as well. You'll notice that Google and Pingdom actually produce different results when it comes to the speed of our site, and those vary from the GT metrics results that we saw earlier. It takes a little while to get your head around it, but the key thing to remember is that no one is going to be giving you accurate, this is the speed of your site results. All of these are going to be about averages and trying to get your averages better. And so between Google Analytics and Pingdom, we're able to get a pretty good set of information that helps us make our site faster. And the second recommendation we have is to remove as much as you can. You visit a lot of famous homepages now. Google was the first one, but most famous homepages, most big sites are going in the same direction as well. You take a look at google.com. You take a look at Twitter. They simply have an image and a couple of sign-in boxes. You take a look at Tumblr. They simply have an image and one sign-up box. And take a look at something like MailChimp. They simply have a menu and one large image on the homepage. Often, if it's good enough for big companies like this, it can be good enough for us as well. From Google to Tumblr to MailChimp to Facebook, the trend is to get simpler and to remove things wherever possible. That tends to go against the grain when it comes to a lot of CMS design, especially if you're buying a template. You'll often see that everything is shown. There's all sorts of content available. There are slideshows, there are thumbnails, there are photo galleries, there are pop-up boxes. My advice is to try and remove whatever you can. To try and remove, well, I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. I think I've got everything. Remove extensions, remove templates, remove modules, remove plugins. there's very little way to successfully make your site faster without trying to slim down your site. It's akin to trying to lose weight without doing any exercise. You need to take a good hard look at the things on your site and try and remove them. It may be social media icons, it may be slideshows, it may be photo galleries, but the more you can remove, the more you can slim down, the faster your site is going to be, and most likely the better the results you're going to get. One of the biggest culprits that you can remove immediately is going to be anything related to images. Images tend to be poorly optimized, they tend to be far too large, and people tend to use far too many of them. We did a rundown of sports websites the other day, which tend to be a little old-fashioned, and we found that just about every soccer team, every US football team that we're able to come across, they all have these enormous, great big slideshows on the homepage. They have these great big carousels of rotating images, and to do that, you have to load the images, you have to load scripts, and in the end, people simply don't use them. People don't skip over them. There's a great site called shouldIuseacarousel.com, which explains all of the reasons why slideshows are trouble for your site. If you have a slideshow, I'd almost certainly recommend replacing it with a single image that tells you a message in one sentence or one short phrase. And I guarantee that the images on your site are likely to improve from going on a diet. One of the great things about the GT Metrics website is when they analyze your site, they actually give you a lot of the replacement images that will make your site faster. Smush It is a really popular option for this. There are some browser plugins that will automatically speed up your images. But let's take a quick look at how GT Metrics can help you on this. And we'll go ahead and analyze Joomla.org and see what it has to say. So let me see if I can blow this up a little bit to make it easier for you to see. So GT Metrics says that Joomla.org loads in 2.3 seconds, which is actually a little better than we had on the slide earlier. They have a optimized images link inside here, and they have a link to the optimized version of these images. For example, there's a blue background image that could be made much smaller, 96% smaller. The eBay logo on the homepage, they have an optimized version for that as well. And so GT Metrics will actually shrink a lot of the images on your behalf, and Smush It is a good option as well. But I guarantee that a large proportion of the images you have running on your site at the moment could be a much smaller file size and still look just as good as they do now. And so when it comes to removing things, we recommend removing as many extensions and plugins and modules as you can, especially carousels and slideshows. If you do have to have images on your site, then use something like Smushit or GTmetrix to make the images as small as you can while still looking good. And this is something that impacts overseas visitors more than it may impact yourself and your customers. So whether you're in Europe and you define overseas as America and Asia, or whether you're in America and you define overseas as Europe and Asia and Africa, a CDN will be a big help for your overseas visitors. Essentially what it will do is automatically store your images on a server that's closer to your visitors. So the site that we run at ostraining.com uses a CDN for our images, and if you're visiting from Europe, the images on our site are actually stored on a server in Europe. If you're visiting from Australia, the images are actually stored on a server in Southeast Asia to be closer to you. And so we have multiple copies of our site images sitting around the world. Images are one of the biggest culprits for slow sites, and so by having multiple stores, we have them closer to our visitors. They load more quickly. There's an extension called CDN for Joomla. It's a free extension, and you may have to pay a few dollars a month for a service to actually store the images, but the extension CDN for Joomla is free and highly recommended. And option number 4 is to cache and compress your site as much as you possibly can. Now, to some extent, this is often done as a reaction to the amount of stuff you have loaded on your site. For example, we do training in Joomla, in WordPress, in Drupal as well. Neither Joomla nor WordPress sites tend to run compression and caching as often as Drupal does. Drupal is really very resource intensive. It loads a lot of CSS files, it loads a lot of JavaScript files, and so they will nearly always have to cache and compress their sites in order to run at a reasonable pace. And so if you find yourself needing to do too much cache and compression, that's often a sign that your site needs to be slimmed down. But even for a regular site, it's a good idea to turn these features on. Let's take a look at where they're located in the core. On a Joomla 3 site and Joomla 2.5, and even back to Joomla 1.5, if I hope you're not, but if you are still using it, you'll find that the cache and compression options start in global configuration. Under the System tab in Global Configuration, you're going to find the cache option on the right-hand side. By default, it's turned off. You can turn it on inside the Global Configuration here. Essentially what the cache will do is create a copy of your page once and then serve it multiple times to your visitors. So if I visit a site, then Joomla may create the home page once, and then we see under cache time, this is set to 15 minutes. It may be that Joomla will keep on serving exactly that page for the next 15 minutes to all of the subsequent visitors. And because Joomla created the page 15 minutes ago, it doesn't have to create it again. It can load it much more quickly. There are some other options for cache under extensions and plugin manager. There is a cache plugin, and there are some options inside there too. However, I only recommend turning on these extra options in the extensions, plugin manager, and cache if you don't have anyone logging into your site. We found that if you get really, really aggressive with your caching, then you tend to cache not just the site and the content, but also sometimes people's personal details as well. So you might cache someone's login box, and so we've seen with some sites, if the cache is set too aggressively, someone may come and visit your site, and Joomla may have stored the login area and the login photo for a previous visitor, which tends to freak out the person who sees it. That's not a Joomla-specific problem. That's more of a cache-specific problem. And so we only recommend turning on these extra options in plugin if you don't have any visitors logging in and out. If you simply have a content site, you can turn these features on too. And we found that simply turning on that cache can halve the time our site takes to load. So this is a record of one of our sites from a few years ago. You can see that when the cache was turned off, our site literally took twice as long to load. And so if I had to recommend one single improvement that you guys could take away from this presentation and apply to your site, if you haven't done so yet, the cache would probably be the most productive recommendation I could make. So under global configuration, we have the cache, and also under the server tab, we have page compression as well. The best way to think about that is your site is a piece of paper. Imagine how quickly a piece of paper is able to travel if you throw it. Not very. Whereas if you scrunch it up into a little ball, it's able to travel much more quickly. And that's essentially what the gzip option does. If you ever download a Joomla extension, you know what a gzip file is. It's basically compressed in order to take up less space and travel more quickly. And that's what the gzip does. It basically will compress your site, and so that your site will be able to travel more quickly to the visitor. So those are the default options. We also have a extension recommendation as well, and that is JCH Optimize. And what it does is take the compression aspect of making your site faster and supersize it. It will compress and minimize and shrink and optimize all sorts of features of your site that the default settings can't reach. I can show you visually just how much of an impact it has on your site. For example, we run JCH Optimize on on ostraining.com, and if I visit one of the pages, I'm going to take a look at the page source. This is how our site loads. There's literally no space left. Everything is stripped down, compressed, and minimized. If you look at a default Joomla site, you find that none of that is true. Extensions and plugin manager and JCH optimize, that can combine and compress all of your CSS files, your JavaScript files, and it will also minify them as well, which basically means we'll strip out all of the white space and make it as lean and mean as the CSS file can be. And it will even minify your HTML as well, which is why when we saw the source code of the OS training site, there was almost no space between anything. So this is what we have at the moment with our Joomla site. I'm going to go ahead and turn on JCH Optimize. And that is what it's done. It has removed all the space. It's compressed all the CSS files. And that's going to save quite a bit of load time on each page. I had a caveat with the caching of the site that it doesn't work too effectively if you have a lot of users logging in and out all the time. So JCH has a caveat as well. It doesn't work perfectly with all extensions. Now, to some extent, if it has a lot of problems with an extension, that's probably going to be a reflection on the quality of that extension, that it's not done in a particularly Joomla-friendly manner, and there might be a good excuse to remove or replace that extension. But the caveat with JCH Optimize is that you will need to test it before you make it live on your site. And it may be that you can't turn on every single option inside JCH Optimize. So it's definitely worth using, definitely worth installing, but it's also definitely worth testing as well before you put it on your live site. And my final recommendation is to keep at it. It really is an ongoing process to test your site for speed. Every time you add something, every time you build a new feature, it's going to take you away from a faster site. And so for our process at OS Training, we actually make a note every Monday to take a look at our site in terms of the site speed and to look at the information from Google Analytics and from Pingdom and to see what we can be doing better. We take a look to see if any extensions are causing problems. We take a look to see if we've had any problems in the past week. And it's literally a weekly thing for us to check our site speed and see where we can improve it. Thank you guys for coming. And Bernie, thank you for inviting me. I'm going to turn it over to see if you guys have any questions.
All right, great job, Steve. This was really fascinating. Tons of great new piece of information that I picked up on for sure. Many of them we were already doing. Some that we're not actually as a company. and I sent you a message, but I'm super happy that we passed your sniff test there with the page load time. A couple of our users have posted really nice comments like, thank you and great presentation, and we have a ton of questions showing up, so we're going to try to get through as many of these as possible.
I apologize for not warning you in advance, Bernie, that Cloud Access were going to be part of the presentation, but you guys passed.
That's really wonderful. We have a couple questions about hosting and things, but you know, a few people posted right away when you were using the Google Chrome tool. If you would go back and just show how to access that one more time.
Sure. It's a little hard to see. Let me blow it up as big as I can.
Perfect.
I went, loaded up Google Chrome, and I clicked on Inspect Element. I clicked on Inspect Element, and then often people will use this for debugging CSS problems. That's what this first Elements tab is for, but there's also a Network tab at the top. And if you have the Network tab open and browse around, you'll be able to see what's been loading. And again, difficult, it's fairly small, but down the bottom of the page, you can see the number of requests, the size of the page, and how long it took to load.
Perfect. Yeah, a couple folks followed up on that. A lot of people letting us know where they're attending from. We have Romania, West Africa, Italy, and a couple others. If you want to let us know where you're attending from, that's always kind of fun. Let's see here. A question from Mark. Does Pingdom register as a hit in analytics? Can you exclude that from your results?
Yes, I think Google Analytics does a pretty good job of removing bots. You're going to get all sorts of bots visiting your site, from Google itself to Bing to Pingdom, and any of those bots who are reputable are going to identify themselves, and analytics like Google Analytics will be able to remove them. So when Pingdom visits your site, it'll say, hey, this is Pingdom. It'll have an identifying mark, and Google Analytics will be able to remove that from the results.
All right. A lot of folks asking, one of your first pieces of advice was to remove items, and they just wanted some clarification. You know, Paul posted about backups. Should you remove old backups in the Akiba admin panel? And yeah, I mean, if you're saving those backups on your server, those are going to be slowing you down. And Steve might want to expand on that. But
when it comes to a backup, that's more of a security question. For example, if you visit your site, you're never going to see a backup file as something being loaded by a visitor. And so having all the Akiba backup files on your site is not going to impact your load time, but it's probably not a good idea from a security point of view. And so it's worth downloading them to your desktop and deleting them from the server.
all right, and Paul also asks about JavaScript. He writes, is JavaScript a problem? Beats Flash, I know that. And then Sean kind of was asking about JavaScript too. I'm using JCH Optimize and have spent a lot of time on it, and it has really helped. However, YSlow still reports that I'm loading 30 JavaScript files and recommends I merge them into one. This is puzzling. So, JavaScript advice for anyone?
In that case, we probably have to look at the URL of the site. If Paul is still around, is he able to post the URL into the questions?
Yeah, I'm sure he'd like to do that. I can send you that as soon as it comes through. We'll wait for that one, and let's see. Let's get to some other questions here while we wait for Paul's URL. You know, Emery specifically asked it. I skipped ahead and used Gmetric. It recommends cache expiration settings for the header. I think you covered that in Core Joomla, didn't you?
Oh, so that's a feature that's not normally shipped with the Joomla core. Let's bring it up. So no, that's not available in default Joomla.
Okay. All right, Emery, hopefully that helps answer your question.
I'm trying to think of a short way to explain it. It's not going to be a huge help. You're basically, I think she's talking about defining an expiry time for the content so that bots and search engines may interact in a little bit of a smarter way with your site. But no, that's not part of the core, and it normally has to be done through an extension or a template.
Okay. Let's see here. Another question from Malcolm. What can we do about ads that we have running on our site that are coming from other servers? And Richard posted a similar question about having a photo gallery page that's importing from Flickr. So if you're using an outside resource like that, do you have any suggestions?
Keep them to an absolute minimum. To be honest, you don't, one of the downsides to using an external script is you don't have much control over it. I suspect they may be talking about perhaps Google AdWords or buy-sell ads for the advertisement. And there's very little, I'm afraid, you can do to optimize it. If you have Google Analytics code or Google AdWords code, you're basically relying on them to do their job right. And each additional external script you have is an additional point of failure. The best thing you can do is try and load them right at the very bottom of your page. It's often good practice to take your Google Analytics or your AdWords code and put it as low down the page as you possibly can. Simply because if the external site is running slowly and you have it at the top of the page, your page is going to hang right at that point. And so the best advice I can give is that you're stuck with the code you're given. And so try and use as few external scripts as possible. And when you have to use them, try and load them as low down the page as you can. Try and put them in the footer position or even lower on your site.
All right. Steve, I sent you a link to Sean's site. Never heard back from Paul about a link, but I got a link from Sean, who is having similar JavaScript issues. And he's posted another comment about JavaScript and mega menus and wondering what he might be able to do to get some help.
Oh, okay. This is it almost looks like a Drupal site to some extent. It doesn't look as if there's much compression being used on the files here. And we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 CSS files, 15 JavaScript files. There's maybe half a dozen from the template. There's 3 from the mega menu. There's 2 from EasyBlog, the extension, 2 from ZenTools. That's a lot, and there's no compression being used. And so some of these like JCH Optimize would be a big help. This looks like it may be a Joomla Bamboo template. I suspect that that's what it is. And they use the T3 framework from Joomla. It may be worth doing a quick Google search to see if anything special can be done with the T3 framework and compression. But certainly there's no compression going on at the moment. And adding something like JCH Optimize and turning it on would be a big help.
All right, perfect. So JCH Optimize, check in with your template developer, Sean. Hopefully that gives you some information. Emery did respond. That does answer his question, so have a lot of other questions to get to. Douglas posted a question, and it's really relative to Google. When I turn on System Cache, the news feed from Google disappears. What's the best way to turn on the System Cache without losing the news feed?
So the System Cache, I presume he's talking about the plugin, some of the more aggressive parts of the plugin. And I have a follow-up question as to whether he's just copying and pasting the code from that Google provides or whether he's using an extension. You do tend to see some of these problems when you get really aggressive with the cache, that it does sometimes tend to break some scripts or some extensions. If you still want to be really aggressive with the cache, and you are actually loading it on a particular page or a particular extension, there's an extension called Jot Cache, which allows you to drill down and exclude certain pages or certain extensions from the cache. And so we actually use that on our site for a couple of parts of the site that we don't want cached. We skip them using Jot Cache. And so it might be worth using that either to exclude the module or the page or the extension which is loading that Google feed.
Okay, and Sean's getting back to you. Just want to let you know, he wanted to say thank you. He turned on JCH Optimize and also the CDN for Joomla. So he's looking forward to putting your advice into implementing your advice. You know, you talked a lot about hosting at the beginning of the webinar, and Paul asked about the differences of shared, virtual, dedicated hosting. And, you know, there's a general rule of thumb that these environments are faster and more secure. I think it's going to come down to a case-by-case basis on where you are hosting. So any other general advice about hosting providers there, Steve?
It's a budget question. Often, if you want to have a server of your own and also get support for it as well, you're probably looking at $100 a month or up in order to get a managed hosting environment. My advice is generally to look at your budget and to spend as much as you can afford. When we were getting started with our business, we often tried to save money on hosting, but the number of times you get a phone call at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning with your site being down or some glitches with your site, there's a lot of places to save money, but I don't think I've ever regretted any money that I've spent on hosting. And so try and scrimp and save elsewhere. And I swear Bernie didn't pay me to say this, but hosting is probably the last place to save money if you're running a business. In terms of the budget end of the market, We've never had good experience with GoDaddy really, but we tend to get good customer feedback from probably HostGator. They tend to produce happy customers for us probably about 80% of the time, which is a good rate for a hosting company. There's always going to be unhappy people with any hosting company, but at the low end, and of course, Cloud Access as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I had to break it down into one piece of advice, save money elsewhere.
Very good. A lot of people saying thank you. A lot of people letting us know where they're attending from. Texas, Florida, Germany, the Netherlands. Fred is from the Netherlands. So thank you for attending. People saying thank you very much for the webinar. Great information. Thank you, Steve. Thanks, Steve and Bernie. Love OS training, and we'll try Cloud Access soon. Very good. Let's see here. Let's try to get a couple more questions in here. Richard wrote, GT Metrics recommends browser caching. Enabling that option in the cache plugin doesn't make any difference. What's your recommendation?
That's probably the most aggressive of all of the browser features. I'd probably ask him to explain a little bit more when he says it doesn't make any difference. It may not be always easy to see if you turn on browser caching, or really if you turn on most of these features and then you do some testing, you may not always see instant results. It may be that you come back in a couple of days and you see that Google Analytics or Pingdom is recording some noticeable speed increases, or even some fairly small speed increases in your site. But it does have an impact, and it will speed up your site at least a little. But one of the difficulties with doing these speed improvements is that, as you saw when we were doing the testing earlier and producing so many different speeds for the same site in the same setup, one of the problems is that it can be difficult to get accurate results immediately. And so you're looking at averages over the course of a couple of days. One of the things that we do find useful with Pingdom is that it's probably got the most accurate way to test on a real-time basis. Inside Pingdom's control panel, they'll actually do a record of all the tests that they're running. It's a lot more real-time than Google Analytics. And you can look inside their test result log, and you can see that 10 minutes ago, OS training loaded in 350 milliseconds from Las Vegas, and then 1,200 milliseconds from France. And that's probably the most accurate real-time feedback that we've been able to find. If we keep on running it through GT Metrics or through our browser, it's not going to give us a reliable average across a whole bunch of different locations.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but for most of these things, it's probably unfair to expect magic results immediately. You're looking over the course at least of a few hours or a few days.
Okay. A couple folks, more advanced attendees, are, I think, commenting about the HT access file and adding deflate lines to the HT access to get some of these caching options to work, or expires data, putting expires data in the HT access file.
Yeah, that's correct. It's the htaccess is, as you dig deeper, a fairly important file, not just to get that information in there, but also to strip it out. You'll often find extensions such as admin tools and I believe SH4 or SDF. They'll add rows and rows and rows of information directly into the htaccess file. And so, in addition to setting the expires headers in the htaccess file, it can often be useful to strip out as much as you can from the htaccess file, because every time your site loads, the htaccess file will load as well.
Okay. Now, getting back to Richard's question, he followed up. He writes, does it make any difference after enabling browser caching and system plugin? The new test on GTmetrix shows it's not enabled. No, don't know quite. Yeah, what might be the issue there?
So for Richard, my email is steve@ostraining.com. If he can send me the URL,
yeah,
I'd be happy to take a look for him.
Cool. And do you recommend only turn on cache in global configuration and not in the plugin manager?
In the plugin manager, if you don't have anyone logging in and out, we often see things like, if you do the more aggressive caching, we often see things like login boxes being cached. And so we've seen people, if Bob comes to visit your site, he sometimes will see Jane's photo and Jane's login information in the login box being cached as well. And sometimes login and logged out states. And that isn't a Joomla specific problem. It's a difficulty with just doing aggressive caching in general. But the system plugin for cache is pretty aggressive, and it's probably the best choice, only if you don't have a lot of visitors logging in and looking up.
Okay. And just getting back to this one more time, Sean is supposed to reply to Richard. And Sean wrote that Richard's question is the issue where page speed and YSlow think the expires caching is not set until it's added to the htaccess file. So hopefully that helps you, Richard. A question from Frederick and mobile devices. And Frederick writes, what about the inevitable problem with smartphones and low broadband speed via mobile internet? For this reason, resizing the template may not be the best option these days. Any advice for those who are targeting the mobile audience?
Oh, that's a pretty big can of worms.
Sure.
You're referring to responsive design, and you often may end up loading the code for your browser and for your iPad on a smartphone as well. And I don't think there's been a clear resolution, unfortunately, among web designers. There's a lot of people pushing back against responsive design for exactly that reason, that doing automatic resizing is a slower option for mobile users. And it's a debate without a clear answer yet. There are still people that will run their websites with a m.example.com version, which is simply for mobile users only. Yeah, I wish I had a resolution to that one, but I think web designers are going to be arguing for a few more years over the best way to deal with mobile visitors.
Okay, and so getting back to some of the plugins or the global configuration settings that you've talked about, and conservative and progressive caching, Joe would like to know, what's the difference? And obviously, we've seen an issue already during the webinar, I think, where we've had an issue with the caching. So what's the difference, essentially?
Between the caching, the
Yeah, conservative versus progressive.
The progressive is much closer to the plugin setup. That's an awful lot more aggressive. The conservative is the safer option for a large number of sites. Although we've been able to run the progressive on our site. I have seen the progressive cause problems with some extensions. Someone mentioned the Google feed, earlier. It's the conservative targets each individual user, whereas trying to think of a simple way to explain this, and so avoid some of those login, logout problems. Whereas the progressive will cache the site for each and every user, and so you can run across some of those problems we saw with the plugin, where login and logout states are recorded and shown to the wrong people.
Okay.
That's really where the majority of cache problems come about, is around that state. And so if you do have a lot of people logging in and logging out, setting it to conservative is the safer choice. And we got around it by using job cache. And we went through and we tried to exclude as many extensions as we can, which will actually show a logged in or logged out state.
All right. I like this question too from Richard. Should I remove core Joomla plugins, templates, etc. that I don't use? Won't they get reinstalled with the next version update?
Yes, they will. And no, that's probably not something that's worth focusing on, for the simple fact that they will get reinstalled, and also they're not actually being loaded in most cases. The one exception is probably especially if you're running a Joomla 2.5 site, there are some plugins on the Joomla extensions directory which will disable some of the default scripts, mood tools, and there's also a modal plugin as well, a modal JavaScript file, both of which are fairly large. Doing that may break one or two extensions, so it's worth testing. No, it's not worth disabling any core plugins, but it may be worth testing to see whether you can safely use a Joomla plugin to disable modals.js and also modal.js as well.
Okay. Paul's posted a question a few times here about white space. Does eliminating white space speed up a website? Don't we need that for different screen resolutions?
No, although it can make actually looking at and diagnosing problems on a website particularly complicated. But no, it doesn't affect resolutions for the browser. They tend to just ignore the white space anyway. It's the white space in our code doesn't have any impact on the white space on the page.
All right, a lot of people saying thanks again, and thanks to Steve. I am impressed. A couple people like Denez commented that I uploaded the extension and it jumped from F to E. I think that means an increase in page load time, perhaps, or a decrease.
Yes, it runs on an A to F scoring system.
Okay.
And moving from F to E is progress.
Okay. Yeah, great, really great information. F to D actually did as comments, so people are.
That's good.
Yeah, people are finding immediate help with some of your suggestions. Abdul has said, I'm so impressed that I am enrolling in a class at OS Training now. Absolutely. In fact, I'm going to steal the presentation back from Steve in just a moment, maybe try to get one more question out of him. We are running out of time, though. Let me see. Okay. Just kind of getting through your questions. And, John posted a question I think Steve answered. John's question was, I had seen login logout issues and narrowed it down to it being a cache issue. I appreciate the advice about not using the cache plugin if you have users logging in. I think he just wants clarification. Does he have the right idea with that?
Yes. We've been working as well with Fotis and the team from Joomla Works, and there's some extra caching features you can add to a server that they're trying to build into a plugin, and they're really struggling with the logged in, logged out issue at the moment. The plugin that they've developed brings a lot of super-powered caching features that you normally will see on the server, and will make it possible to install directly into a hosting account much more easily. They would have released it by now, but the logged in, logged out issue is causing them a lot of heartache.
Okay. Well, you know what, Steve? Thank you so much for helping us out with this. A lot of people commenting. Frank specifically wrote, please come back again, Steve Burge. Definitely a keeper. I will agree with you, Frank, and try to get Steve to come back. Steve, before I steal the screen back from you, is there anything else you'd like to add about maybe the newsletter you're going to send to our attendees today? Or
Sure, we will send the slides around and links to tutorials we have on these extensions. And Bernie, I believe you're going to put the webinar up on YouTube.
Yep.
And we'll try and notify people who came and didn't come as soon as that's up.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so that should be later today. Steve and I are both actually in the same time zone, which doesn't happen very often. So look for an email from Steve soon. I'm going to steal the presenter back, Steve, so everyone should be able to see my screen now. And I just want to remind you that we will post this to YouTube a little bit later today. It takes some time to archive to my computer, but I'm going to post it here and scroll down, show you exactly where it'll be, right in this playlist, Special Joomla Webinars, Extensions, Upgrade, and Development. This will be here later today, and if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get a notification every time a new webinar or tutorial becomes available. I also want to just remind you that you should visit ostraining.com. I think, as soon as I entered the Joomla sphere, as they call it, and I was learning and developing with Joomla, I heard OS Training as much as any other name out there. And it's really an honor to have Steve here, and they've done such. Steve personally too has done some good work within the Joomla community. I know he's been very active. But excellent resource, OS Training. And remember, at Cloud Access, we've got a lot of services. You can try a free demo trial or try one of our free training classes. If you come to Joomla webinars here, we have several upcoming events. I'm going to go over to upcoming special webinars. And this Wednesday, we're going to have a webinar on JCal Pro, which is a calendaring and collaboration extension for Joomla. We're also going to have two webinars next week and then the following, and they're both about access control lists. One is just a basic core access control list ACL webinar, teaching you the basics. But then we have Sander Potcher coming in to talk about the ACL Manager, and that's on Monday, July 29th. The first one's on Friday, July 26th. And the ACL Manager is an extension that gives you a clickable permissions grid to kind of make ACL a little bit easier within Joomla. So if you're looking for more information about access control lists, definitely come and check those out. We also have Kaushar Ahmed coming in from Joomshaper to talk about the Helix V2 framework for templating. So some good content coming up. Steve, I'm going to have to steal you back at some point because that content you presented, I think, was right on for a lot of our users today. And thank you again for helping us out.
Oh, thanks for having me, buddy.
And look for an email from Steve soon. And thank you all for attending. A lot of people saying thank you now. Yeah, good luck developing your Joomla site and speeding it up some. Take care, everybody.